Hello, so what happens if a learner driver tries to go on the motorway on a driving test? Well, in my last video I mentioned this and a surprising number of people have been asking me about it. So in this video I'm going to tell you exactly what happens because it isn't as simple as you may think. Now many people think the learners are allowed on the motorway, and that is only partly true because yes, learner drivers are allowed on the motorway since 2017, but it isn't as simple as just learners can go on the motorway. For a learner driver to go on the motorway, they must be with a fully qualified driving instructor in a dual-controlled car. You can't go on a motorway with your parents, a friend, a relative, or any other supervising driver, including a driving test examiner. So yes, examiners are not allowed on the motorway with learners. So what would happen then if a learner driver went to drive down the motorway on a driving test? Well, first of all, the examiner will do all that they can to stop it from happening, but sometimes that isn't possible because if a learner started to go off and it wouldn't be safe to brake or go for the wheel, they may have to just let them head for the motorway. Now I'll show you some video in the background now from Common Driving Test Mistakes 4, and you'll see a section where I'm passing a motorway junction and you could quite easily end up on there on your test if you're not careful. Now I have spoken to 2 examiners who've had this happen to them, and here is what would happen. You have to pull up as soon as it's safe to do so, which would normally be on the hard shoulder of the motorway. The examiner then has to phone the police, and you have to have a police escort to the next junction. So just imagine how you'd feel if you're on your driving test and you're having to drive down the motorway with a police car next to you with the lights on, guiding you to the next junction. Now I know people are going to ask things like, why doesn't the examiner drive? Well, examiners are not insured to drive the vehicles that you do your test in. If they were, the cost of the driving test will go right up because the DVSA would have to take out a massive policy to cover over 2,000 examiners on every vehicle they could possibly drive. So that's why driving examiners are not allowed to drive the vehicle. I've done other videos about walkbacks, which is when an examiner has to stop a test for some reason because the pupil isn't up to standard and they walk back to the centre. And this does happen quite often. So once the police have escorted you to the next motorway exit, one of 2 things could happen. Probably the examiner would guide you to drive back to the test centre, but bear in mind you could be a long way away, seeing as you've been down a junction on the motorway. Alternatively, they may just stop the test and walk back to the centre. Probably not, because it will be quite a long way, but that's one of 2 things that can happen. And yes, it has happened in the past. I've spoken to 2 examiners who've had it happen to them. And I do remember one occasion when I was driving back to a test centre with an examiner. I was actually driving the car because this examiner had had a test that had been abandoned after the pupil crashed. And I was talking to them about this, and they said, yeah, we did try and get it so that we'd be able to drive on the motorway with learners, but the lawmakers, for whatever reason, said, no, you'd have to be a fully qualified instructor. So if you end up on a motorway on the test, you would have a police escort to the next junction, which will be highly embarrassing, and you'd have to then drive back from there. Check out these other videos on the screen now to answer lots more questions you've got about driving lessons and tests. And as always, I'll see you again soon for more videos.